Okay, it's 5:30, so I think we'll get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to History Happy Hour. My name is Callie McCune, and I'm the manager of public programs at the Indiana Historical Society. I'm so grateful to see you all here and welcome you to our program tonight on the Myaamia people. This History Happy Hour was brought to you with support from One America Financial Partners, a national provider in the insurance and financial services marketplace. At the Indiana Historical Society, we aim to be Indiana's storyteller, connecting people to the past. We do that by collecting millions upon millions of pieces of paper-based material, whether that is books, paintings, letters, photographs, diaries, maps. I could go on and on and on. And then we try to find interesting, exciting, and intriguing ways to share those, whether it's through publications, exhibitions, or events like this. We're really excited that you can join us through virtual programming like the History Happy Hours, and we can't wait to start welcoming you back into our building in about 2 weeks. I'm really excited to start seeing people's faces again. You have no idea. Before I introduce Lauren Peightel, our moderator for the evening, I have a little bit of Zoom logistics to go over with you guys. You're all muted tonight as you're coming into the webinar, but we do want to make sure we hear your voices through the chat box. So feel free as we're going along with our conversation tonight to put any questions you have for Diane or Lauren in the chat box. We're going to kind of try to stay away from the Q&A section and really work on that chat. I'll also try to be dropping links in there as we go. You may have to right-click on those links and copy them in order to paste them in your favorite web browser, but don't worry if you're having trouble. We'll include all of them in your thank you email tomorrow morning. Lauren and Diane will talk for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions. So at any time tonight, if you have one, drop it into the chat. I'll make sure Lauren gets them, and then we're ready to go once we get to that Q&A portion. If you enjoy this program, please consider coming back for more. We're taking a little break next week for the 4th of July holiday. I hope you guys go have an appropriately socially distanced party like I will. Maybe go enjoy the woods, but then come back the week after. We have more happy hours coming up, first on Ohio River Pirates, which is gonna be fascinating, then on CIA agents, donuts, and so much more. You can find out all about those and register at indianahistory.org. So without further ado, I'm going to toss this over to Lauren Peightel, Manager of Genealogy and Culture Programs at the Indiana Historical Society, to get us going.
Thanks so much, Callie. As you mentioned, my position works with finding your family story and also connecting all of us to our heritage and culture and celebrating that. So it is my honor and privilege to have a conversation today with Diane Hunter, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Myaami Tribe of Oklahoma. The Indiana Historical Society have worked with her in the past on her serving as an advisor for one of our You Are There exhibits, You Are There Angel Mounds, and some other education feedback. So with us, it's important that we share all Hoosier stories and bring that context and history to the present. So I'd like for Diane Hunter to introduce herself. So go for it. Diane, are you frozen? Okay. All right, so she said that she was having some internet connection issues earlier today. And so I want to give her a minute to possibly call in. I don't know if we want to share in the chat to make sure she for sure knows that she's frozen or something. And so talking again about the Myaami Tribe of Oklahoma, today we're going to have more of a conversation with the Myaamiaki, a living people with the past. And when Diane is able to call in, we will get that started.
Hey, Lauren.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about Angel Mounds and maybe how Diane was able to help us to consult on that exhibit, so when people can come back into our building in 2 weeks, they're able to know kind of how they contributed to that and what the exhibit's about?
Sure. So You Are There 1939, 1937? Ugh. Angel Mounds is exploring a Mississippian culture down in southern Indiana around Evansville that we are unsure about what happened to those Native people. There's all sorts of stories that go and theories that go with that, but we do know a little bit about their culture and their history. And we wanted to make sure that we had some Native voices and communities that we were reaching out to when we were putting together the content for that exhibit. So as the Miami People's Territory, the Myaamiaki covers that region of the state, it was advised to us that we bring in the Miami tribe of Oklahoma to just sit so that they can talk about it. It's not clear that the Miami people are descended from that culture biologically, the stories, but it was important to talk about it because Diane had mentioned to Danny that that the land they are oversee the land currently, as far as like it's part of the historic tribal land.
So IHS is mostly a paper-based archive. And so one of the things that I know Lauren's been working a lot with is how we can work in stories from Native peoples who are a culture that really are people that don't write their traditions down. So can you talk a little bit about how we're trying to work those stories in and some of the ways we're trying to kind of jump into that?
So I would also say part of that is just with our multicultural collecting initiative that our colleague Nicole Martinez Legrand is working on. That project was was really focusing originally on Latinx communities and Asian American communities to interview folks from those communities, bring in oral histories, transcriptions, to get that to be part of the IHS collection, where we noticed that we had some holes in what stories we were covering. About a year ago, Nicole did sit down with Diane Hunter and her son, John Vickers, to start that oral history interview process, and really got some great question and answers about that. We really explored more about the family unit, and Diane talked a bit more about that when she was helping our actors and facilitators to understand more about culture of regional Native persons for the Angel Mounds exhibit as well. So we're really hoping to get all of those resources and much more into the future, into the collection, and have that be part of our educational and public programming format. Welcome back, Diane. You're muted yet.
So let's unmute you. There you go.
Okay.
So glad you're able to come back.
Yes.
No one really wants to hear me ramble. I'd love for you to start off and just introduce yourself.
Aya, te pewe ne alaka koke e wahanungi kakikwe. Checha kokwa wainsriane, nilamita senia Myaamikia. I just said hello. It's good to see all of you as much as we can see each other here in this, whatever this place is today. My name is Diane Hunter. I am a citizen of the Miami tribe of Oklahoma, and I'm honored to serve my nation as Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. It's good to be with all of you.
Thanks so much, Diane. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can talk about, as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, what are your responsibilities and how do you interact with Miami and non-Miami citizens?
Well, I'd like to take you back a little bit in time. If you think back to the 1950s, early 1960s, President Eisenhower started the interstate system. There was lots of construction of highways. There was lots of construction of dams. There was just a lot of construction going on throughout the United States. And by the mid-1960s, they began to realize that a lot of places of historic importance were gone. They'd just been destroyed. And they realized that that needed to stop or we would have none of our history left. And so in 1966, Congress passed the National Historic Preservation Act to preserve and protect sites of historic importance. And under the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106 provides for a state historic preservation officer, a SHPO, and for tribes, federally recognized tribes who so desire, we can have a tribal historic preservation officer, THPO, sometimes called a TIPO. And what this allows us to do is to consult on any federal undertaking. And an undertaking is anything that involves the federal government, that it can be they're doing a project like building a highway, or they're funding a project, or they're issuing a permit or in some way regulating the project. And if the project has the potential to affect sites of historic importance, then Section 106 kicks in. And the federal government needs to consult with state historic preservation officers, but also with tribal historic preservation officers, both on our tribal land, but also in our ancestral homelands. So consultation is important to us because it's a way we can protect sites, places we lived, places that were of cultural and historic importance to us. It's also an opportunity for us to educate both the federal government agencies as well as those who were involved, others who were involved in the projects about our tribe and our history. My job as THPO is never to stop a project. I don't have the power to stop a project. My job is to protect sites. And so that's where consultation comes in. How can this project go forward and we in some way protect the sites? And if we can't, how can we preserve the memory of those sites? I said earlier that it's federally recognized tribes, and it is only federally recognized tribes that are involved because it's a matter of our sovereignty. Back in 1820s, 1830s, the Supreme Court had a series of 3 decisions called the Marshall Trilogy. And those 3 decisions defined what it means to be a federally recognized tribe. And they said that tribes are dependent domestic nations with inherent sovereignty. So what is sovereignty? It's simply the full right and power of a governing body over itself without any interference from outside sources or bodies. So our sovereignty as a tribe is our ability to govern ourselves and to make our own decisions. But we're a dependent sovereign nation. And so as part of the United States, we do consultation, but it's government to government consultation, federal government to tribal government. And that's how Section 106 comes in, because as sovereign nations, we have the right to have a say about what happens to places of historic and cultural importance to us. So my work as Thippo is about our identity, who we are as a people. It's about our way of life, our language, our culture, our history. Those all play into that. It's about protecting the places where our ancestors were, as well as our ancestors themselves as they remain. And then it's about leaving something for the next generation. So that's how I interact with non-Miami people on a government-related basis.
You also work with the Indiana Historical Society so that we can help educate and interpret.
That's right, that's right. So, and actually this kind of thing, I do a lot of reaching out to various groups and organizations, schools, usually in person, but in this time, this is the way we do it. So there are many different ways that I can interact and work together with various organizations and individuals to help preserve our history, but also to share our history so that others know about our history and who we are today.
Right.
In terms of Miami people, we have a number of cultural programs for our youth and for adults. Language learning. Our language went to sleep and began to be revitalized in the 1990s. And so language learning is a big part of what we do. What you're seeing here is the Chief's Challenge. At our annual meeting, people, usually young people, come up and tell the chief what new words they've learned in our language, and they get a prize. And so it's just a way of encouraging young people to learn the language. And we have many other tools for language learning. So in Oklahoma, where our tribal headquarters are, we have an annual meeting, and that's where we most importantly exercise our sovereignty internally as we elect our leaders. So this summer, it's going to be a much abbreviated meeting, and it's been put off because of the situation. But we come together. This is last year, so we were not social distancing, as you can see, crowding in to vote for our leaders and to share with our leaders what we want to see them do for us as a tribe. 5 years ago, the tribe bought land in Fort Wayne, and that's where I work in Fort Wayne, and a colleague and I, and we have events for our tribal citizens. We have about 700 tribal citizens who live in Indiana today. And so we have various events and people come, and we have various cultural activities, but we always have lacrosse. In spring and summer, we always play lacrosse. Lacrosse, if you don't know, is a native game. It was here when Europeans arrived. And so we've been playing lacrosse since time immemorial, and we play it with elders and small children, men and women, boys and girls, modern sticks, lacrosse sticks, or as our chief there in the middle is running for the ball, he's trying to catch it in a traditional stick that we also are coming to use.
The opening is so much smaller on the traditional sticks.
Yes, and it's, I'm not a player myself, but I'm told that it's a completely different technique to use the traditional sticks. The modern sticks are more like the Iroquois style sticks, but we're learning to play with these older sticks. Every summer we have camp for our young people. 1 week in Oklahoma and then another week here in Fort Wayne, replicated because, and people can come to whichever place is closest to them. And each year it's a different theme. We have 6 different themes that rotate as the as the children go through the camp. And it's where they come together to find out that there are other Myaamia people and learn to know each other as Myaamia people and learn our language, learn about our culture. And that's the point of the web there that you see, is that we have these connections, these things that connect us as Myaamia people. Now, during this summer, it's a virtual camp. And so they're doing that online this year, but continuing to learn the same themes that they would have learned if they'd gotten to go to camp this summer.
Those camps, they're so important to teaching culture, and great to have all those events. So what is the meaning of the name Myaamia? And can you tell us a little bit about the origin of that name, and then about kind of the story of the people through the coming out place?
So Myaamia is from an Algonquian word, and Algonquian is a group of languages. Our language is part of one of the Algonquian languages. Many Great Lakes tribes have Algonquian languages, Ojibwe, Ottawa, Potawatomi. They're all Algonquian languages. And so Myaamia comes from that early Algonquian form, and it means downstream people. We don't know who gave that name to us, whether another tribe gave it to us because we were downstream from them, or whether we gave it to ourselves. We don't know that. But we do have another name for ourselves. We have always called ourselves Myaamiaki, which means the people. And you will see a lot of tribes have a name for themselves that means the people. And so whether we had one name for ourselves, Myaamiaki, and then also Myaamia or Myaamiaki in plural, we're not sure about that. To tell you about our origins, we believe that we most likely came from the north, somewhere probably in Canada. Some of our stories give indications that refer to things that you would find in the northern lands. But we have a story, our earliest story, that tells how we came on the St. Joseph River. If you look at where the map hits the white near the top, that's the St. Joseph River. If you're familiar with northern Indiana, the St. Joseph River curves down at South Bend. So South Bend is the south bend of the St. Joseph River. So that, to kind of orient you to that a little bit, where we're talking about. And this is the place that we had our origin. We presumably came down Lake Michigan, likely, and came out on the St. Joseph River. So I'm going to tell you the story that my grandfather, my grandmother's father, told us, and it was written down, recorded, so that we still have this story about our origin as Myaamia people. Mitame, Myaamiaki, Nipangonje, Sakachawecheke. At first, the Myaamia came out of the water. The place where they came out is called Coming Out Place. The first ones came out of the water, grab a hold of tree limbs, they told each other, and they came out. And they formed a town there. And then they went away. They left that place. But after a while, one came back. And when he came back, he saw other people at Coming Out Place. To our surprise, their language was just like our language. They gave them a name. They called them Old Moccasins. I don't know where they were from. Nobody knows where they went. This is how my mothers told me. My mother, Sekakweta, takes hold, and her older sister, Wapangikwa, Swan Woman. All the old Indian men believed it. They call the river Coming Out River at the place where they came out of the water. And because of this, people are named Sekakweta, takes hold, Sekakononga, he takes hold of it, and Sekakokwa, taking hold woman. Ehinge. So that is our oldest story, and it's the story of our origin as Myaamia people. We don't know where we came from. We don't know for sure who we came from, but at that moment, we are Myaamiaki. We are Miami people. And so 3 things that I wanted to point out to you that are in this story about what people notice, what Myaamia people notice to determine who someone is. They went back to a place that was familiar, and the people were there. They called him old moccasins. So they're looking at culture. Is he dressed like us? And we were really surprised that they spoke our language. So if you look at place and language and culture, dress in particular, those are things that Myaamia people traditionally looked at to identify who someone was. Now, we came out of the water, and you can see on the map near the top, there's a kind of in the center near Lake Michigan, there's a star-shaped circle there, Sakiweonge, the coming out place. And so we lived there for a while, as the story told, and then we came out, different peoples came out at different times and left the place, and eventually started more and more villages, primarily in the Wabash River Valley, as you can see from the map. And also in Fort Wayne, what's now Fort Wayne, Kikayonga was one of the villages in what is now Fort Wayne. And so this was where we were. This is where we lived since time immemorial. We don't know how long ago this coming out story took place. And so this is where we have lived for a very, very, very long time.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, and also just hearing your language is really important for all of us to know that it's still being spoken and around us. So I want to talk more about storytelling and what's important to the culture, because you mentioned the story was passed through the family. So what are some of the most important stories or aspects of your culture?
So this story that I just told is a history story. We have many other stories that are not history stories, but it's a real event that happened in a real place. Probably the most significant event in our history since our coming out of the water is our removal. And just to give you some background, as I said, we were living in what is now Indiana, throughout this, what's now Indiana, Western Ohio, Illinois, that whole area where we lived, where we hunted. Our villages were primarily in what's now Indiana, Western Ohio, but that whole land was important for our survival. After the Treaty of Paris, 1783, ending the Revolutionary War, Americans started coming west, and more and more and more of them. And ultimately, we ended up signing the 1795 Treaty of Greenville, in which we ceded most of Ohio and some small parts of Indiana. And that was to settle it. So they had their land and we had our land, and we would be all good together there. But they kept coming further, and they were coming into Indiana further and further. And so we would sign treaty after treaty after treaty, ceding more and more and more land until the Treaty of 1840. And at that point, we ceded our last 500,000 acres. It was called the Great Miami Reserve. And it went from, it's in north central Indiana, from just south of the Wabash River down to south of Kokomo. So in that general area, if you're familiar with that part of the state. But we ceded that last 500,000 acres in exchange for land that was supposed to be about the same size in Kansas. But more importantly, we agreed to be removed to Kansas and signed the treaty in 1840 that we would be removed. Now, as you can imagine, a lot of people weren't happy about that, did not want to leave. Most Miami people did not want to leave. We had 5 years to leave, and we put it off and put it off and put it off. In October of 1846, the US Army came with guns and rounded us up from our villages and took us to Peru. And at Peru, we were put on canal boats. And we took those boats up through Fort Wayne and into Ohio, to the Miami and Erie Canal, which we took down to Cincinnati. That was the end of the canals. And at that point in Cincinnati, we needed to change from the canal boats to a steamboat. And so if you will switch the slide, I want to show you, this was from the newspaper, the Cincinnati Gazette, on the day that we arrived in Cincinnati. And if you see daily receipts by the Miami Canal, 134 barrels of whiskey, flour, wool, merchandise, varnish, 2 Indian ponies, Miami Indians, 225 over and 78 under 8 years old, perch stones, pigs, salt, furniture, and so on and so on. And then shipments to St. Louis by the Colorado, 30 tons of dry goods, 32 casks of government stores, 350 Indians with their baggage. Now, the Cincinnati Gazette also published a passenger list, or at least the ship had a passenger list. We were not on that passenger list. This is the cargo list. We were cargo being loaded onto the Colorado, the steamship. So we got on the Colorado and went down the Ohio River. And if you'll go back to that removal map, we took the steamboat down the Ohio River to the Mississippi and up to St. Louis. Now we had to stay a couple of days in St. Louis and change steamboats. The boats that went on the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers were too deep. For the Missouri River is a very shallow river. And so we had to change boats. While we were waiting on a place called Bloody Island. It was called that because it's a place where they held duels. We had made an earlier stop near Evansville, and somewhere between Evansville and St. Louis, 2 people died, an elder man and an infant. And so those 2 people at the edge of Myaamiaki, at the edge of the land of the Miami, they were buried on Bloody Island. Now, Bloody Island today is directly across the Mississippi River from the St. Louis Arch, the gateway to the west. So we got on the Clermont II and took the Missouri River west to the Kansas Landing, which was the very early beginnings of what today is Kansas City. And from there, we went overland south 50 miles to Sugar Creek, Kansas. And arriving early in November, there was a very early and very cold winter. There were no houses for us. We were given government issue tents. and we had no food. We had government food, but it's November. We can't grow crops. Most of the plants that we're familiar with in Indiana aren't the same in Kansas. So it was a very difficult winter. About 10 people died en route to Kansas, and about another 20 died between early November and the end of December, because it was just a very, very difficult time for us. But by the next spring, we started making that our home. And we built our homes, we grew corn. It was where we lived. It was our new home. And then there was the Treaty of 1867, in which we were coerced into making a second removal to northeastern Oklahoma. And that is where the tribe is today, in Ottawa County, Oklahoma. And the town there is Myaamia, and that is where our tribal government is today. So that's the most significant story from our history. There's so many stories, so many other stories that I could relate. But some of the other things that are important from our culture, I'm going to talk about our family relationships, because they are different. For us, family is much broader than we think of in modern American culture. Our broad family is very important to us. So my father's brothers are my fathers. My mother's sisters are my mothers. My cousins are my siblings. And my grandparents apply to anyone from my grandparents' generation and back. So we use those same words for father, for uncle, for mother, for aunt, for grandparents, for all these people. So in the center of this picture you're looking at now, that's Swan Godfrey Hunter, my grandmother. And she's surrounded here by a few of her siblings. She was one of 18th of 19, so I didn't put all their pictures. Well, we don't even have pictures of all of them.
That's a large family.
A very large family, yes. There's a story to go with that, but I'll not go there right now. So Swan is my grandmother. These people are all my grandparents. My grandmother and her siblings are all my grandparents. And their parents, if you will go to the next slide, are also my grandparents. You noticed earlier, perhaps, that when I told the story, I said it was told by my grandfather, my grandmother's father. So this is my grandmother's father and mother, my grandparents also. This is Wapanaki Kapwa, Gabriel Godfrey, and my great-grandmother, my grandmother, Martha Jane Logan Godfrey. And so this is family, and not having this distancing of the greats, great-grandparents, how many, 10 great-grand, whatever you count, they're my grandparents, and it brings them closer. There's a much closer sense of who these people are. They are my family. They're not just ancestors, they are my family. And that's not my thing with my family. That is a Myaamia understanding of family. While we're looking at this picture, I want to point out another cultural feature. If you notice in Jenny, she was called Jenny, even though her name was Martha Jane, in her skirt, along the bottom and along the side, you can see a kind of design there. And along Gabe's leggings there, along the side of his leggings, you can see a design. And that's ribbon work. By the way, Gabe was about 5'4". His father was about 6 feet tall. So we think that those were his father's leggings, and that's why they bunch up at the bottom. But so ribbon work is a very important art for my Myaamia people. It's not unique to Myaamia people. Many of the Great Lakes tribes do ribbon work. But what is unique for Myaamia people is that our designs are, as far as we know, exclusively geometric patterns, primarily diamond patterns. And if you go to that next slide, you can see this is a picture of some moccasins from the 19th century. And you can see how these diamonds are forming these designs. And those are hand sewn. On moccasins, in general, the ribbon work is sewn onto a piece of wool, which then with moccasins would be attached to the flap, or on another piece of clothing would be sewed onto the clothing. Because if you look at this moccasin, this is about 7.5-inch moccasin, okay? Those are tiny, tiny pieces, and they're sewn with tiny, tiny stitches. The Miami University in Ohio, their museum had an exhibit on ribbon work. Unfortunately, then the museum had to close this spring, but I got to go and see, and these stitches are very, very close together, closer together than often than a normal machine sewing stitches would be together. So this took a lot of work. It was very fine, very delicate work. It took a lot of time. So you aren't going to put it on something and then throw it away when the moccasin wears out. These were worn for very special occasions. You're not going to wear a skirt with ribbon work and go harvest corn. These were your best clothes. And they are made, ribbon work's made by different tribes in different ways. But the way Myaamia ribbon work is made, we take, it used to be silk ribbons. Today we use taffeta. It's cheaper and easier to work with. But you cut the taffeta at different places, and then you fold it down, and then you sew it onto a piece of wool, and then you take another ribbon, do the same, and you sew it overlapping the first one. And as you do this, it forms these diamond patterns. So we've all relearned how to do this, and it's something that we as Myaamia people can take great pride in.
Thank you for sharing how historically ribbon work has been important and moving that to present day. So we're hitting the 15-minute mark left of the program. So we have so many great questions coming in. So I'm gonna rush us a little bit and move into some of the great resources that Diane shared with us to just educate yourself, check out the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma website, and all of these other great resources that will be coming in a thank you email. I believe it's coming tomorrow, right, Kelly? And so please check all those out. And if you have, I know Diane has said to me, if you have any other questions, that they are there to answer anything, to be a resource for you. And so I want to just give a minute to this last slide, Diane, and then make sure that we get to some of these really great questions.
Sounds good. So people ask how they can work with us, help us, what they can do to interact with us. And the most important thing is to treat us as a living people. We are perfectly capable of telling our story and of representing our own history and of representing ourselves. We don't need others to do for us, but we do appreciate others doing with us. As Lauren and Callie and others have done, bringing me in to talk about our history. So we really enjoy working with others, but not having others do for us. And if you have questions about our tribal history, the best place to come is to us. There are many sources out there, but as over time we're learning better history and better information about ourselves, and so we can direct you to the best places if you want to know about us. The next slide is going to be my contact information, my email, and I want to encourage you, contact me if you have any questions, and I can answer your questions or direct you to people who can.
So that's a great segue into getting into these really great questions. So one of the we're going to try and go through as many as possible because there's so many great ones, and if we don't get through all of them, they have your email and can continue the conversation. So real quick, how far did the Myaami retreat from Ikionga area when Iroquois encroached into this area?
Yeah, so in the 1600s, there was the Beaver Wars and other things going on. The Iroquois were coming west, and we wanted to get out of their way. So how far west depends on which Myaami people you're talking. Some just went north. We know that there were Myaami people along the St. Joseph River. They're near the coming out place again. But many people went into Illinois, and some went even into Wisconsin as far north as the Green Bay area. And that was for a short period of time. By the early 1700s, we were back in Indiana.
Could you comment on the efforts to obtain federal recognition for the Myaami tribe of Indiana? So I'm thinking that's the Myaami Nation, or just the Myaami tribe of Oklahoma achieving federal recognition initially.
So federal recognition, what that means has changed over time. The federal government was signing treaties with us. A treaty is between two nations. So simply by signing the treaties with us, they were recognizing us as a nation. But the treaty period ended in the late 1800s, and federal recognition changed over time. I believe it was 1936, the Indian Reorganization Act, and for those in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Indian Welfare Act, encouraged tribes to write a constitution, and we became recognized with that constitution so in 1939. So what it means to be recognized has changes, but today it is having a formal recognition by the federal government for us as a tribe. I didn't tell you that at removal, there were a few families that were exempted from removal, and a few families people that came back from Kansas. And that 700 of us who are in Indiana today are descendants of those families. And until 1996, those families were not able to be enrolled in the Myaami tribe of Oklahoma. And that's a long story I won't try to go into. So a group in Indiana sought federal recognition, but it did not succeed with that. But in 1996, the Myaami tribe of Oklahoma changed the requirements to be enrolled. And now I can't say that every person, Myaami person in Indiana can be enrolled, but if not every, virtually every Myaami person can now enroll in the Myaami tribe of Oklahoma.
So we actually had a question that kind of touched on what you just talked about, where the original question was, any idea of the percentage or numbers of those removed versus those that didn't leave? And I know in a previous discussion, we had also talked about there were some people who returned later.
Right. The numbers are squishy because trying to look at how many stayed and didn't go at all, how many came back and stayed. Some stayed, and then there was a second roundup, if you will, of people who were not exempted but had stayed. So the numbers probably ultimately, there were about 300, a little over 300 who went on removal, and maybe something close to that back in Indiana. But it's difficult to parse all those numbers.
Right. So we had a question that in the map that you shared that was showing Miami land in the coming out place, the term heritage landscape was used. Can you expand on what heritage landscape means?
There are several terms that might be used. I often say our ancestral homelands,
Okay.
our Aboriginal homelands. It's the place where we lived since time immemorial until our removal. Well, actually, including Kansas, because we were removed from Kansas now too. So.
Right. So we have a woman that said that she is Cherokee from Peightel, Oklahoma, and she's curious, how do you think Miami culture changed after the removal to Oklahoma?
Oh, that's a long answer.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of changes, and language began to diminish. People started speaking more English, and eventually started dressing more like their white neighbors. It was just a process of assimilation, because we're such a small number. When the tribe went to Oklahoma, there were, I think, less than 100 people who initially went to Oklahoma on the second removal. So you're surrounded in part by other tribes, but also in part by Americans. And so it's very difficult to retain the culture. Our last native speakers were in Indiana, and they died in the 1960s.
So this is a great point to shout out, and I know a link will be coming in the thank you email too. We are hosting on September 1st George Ironstrack, who is also Miami Tribe of Oklahoma, who's done a lot in the work to revitalize this language that went to sleep. So when you get your thank you email, there'll be a link to join us for that conversation too. It'll be really fascinating to hear all about that. So we have another question that I know we had this discussion when you were an advisor for the exhibit. This person says, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement statement honoring the Myaamia tribe of Oklahoma before an upcoming meeting. Is there a form to use or language to include that would be especially meaningful? And so I know there's been discussions from many different people about land acknowledgement statements and their uses, if you just want to touch on that.
Yes, if you don't know what a land acknowledgement statement is, it's a statement that acknowledges that there were people whose land this was before the people who are here today, in brief. And it's more and more places, more and more organizations are making that effort, and I applaud that. I'm starting to work with different organizations to help them with that. Right now there isn't a recommended language, but if whoever that person is, if you want to email me, I'd be happy to talk with you about it.
Great. I think we have time for one more quick question, and then I will shoot it off to Callie to send everyone off to whatever yummy dinner you're about to have. So the responsibility of TIPO, as you explained, is really to help protect sites. So Eric asked, what are the biggest threats right now to historic preservation of the Myaamia culture, places, and artifacts?
That's a good question, and I would say probably the greatest threat is twofold. One, I only work when the federal government is involved. Sometimes towns or state agencies will contact me, but if the federal government is not involved, then I don't have to have a part in it. So sites that are on private land can be endangered because the private landowner or the town or whatever don't care. And there are, unfortunately, looters who want whatever they can find for themselves and don't really care that it's not theirs to have, and don't care that these items have intrinsic value to Native peoples. So I would say those are two great issues in that regard.
So ending on a bit of a positive note in historic preservation, is there one that you're most proud of the work that you've done to bring back and protect?
We have only a few historic buildings. Most of what we have is underground. In Oklahoma, we have some houses from some allotment era houses, late 19th century houses that the tribe has now owns and are being restored or have been restored. And in Indiana, there are houses that, for example, here in Fort Wayne is the Chief Richardville House. It's owned by the Fort Wayne History Center, and they do a marvelous job of working with Miami people and working with the tribe to protect and preserve that 1826, I believe, house. We put a new roof on it a few years ago. So we work closely with them, and we're very appreciative of those kinds of efforts.
Okay, so thank you so much, Diane, for all of your time today and thoughtful presentation and conversation. Thanks to everyone today for really great questions. I want to give Diane a moment to leave a closing statement that I know is very important to the tribe to say, and then Callie will close us out.
I just want to thank you all for listening to what I have to say. And again, I want to reiterate that it's really important to talk to us and share our who we are, because we are not a people of the past. We are a living people with a past. Nishinewe, thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane.
And thank you, Lauren and Diane. And thank you all for coming tonight to History Happy Hour. We are continuing this series. We're taking a bit of a break next week for the 4th of July holiday, and then we're coming back strong to talk about Ohio River Pirates right after, I believe it's July 9th. You can find all the information on how to register at indianahistory.org. But if you're missing out on History Happy Hours next week, consider joining us on Tuesday, June 30th for Real History, when we're going to dive into the fact and fiction behind Netflix limited series Self-Made, inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker. And then don't forget that we're going to be talking about Myaamia language and threads of our knowledge on September 1st. Bethany put that link in the chat, and we'll get that to you in the thank you email tomorrow too. We hope to see you back at that time. If you can register for all those things at indianahistory.org. If you missed your chance to donate or would like to make a further gift to the Indiana Historical Society, we'd really appreciate it in allowing us to continue to do virtual events like this. You can contribute to us at indianahistory.org/donate, and I believe that link's also going to be in your chat momentarily. You're going to get an email from us tomorrow morning with all the links in a survey. It will take you 1 whole minute. I hope you'll have a chance to fill it out because we'd love to know what you thought and how we can make events like this better in the future. This talk will be posted to YouTube in the next week or two and available at our website. So stay tuned to be able to relive all the fun. And I think that's about it. So I hope you all stay healthy, stay safe, and we can't wait to see you at an upcoming event. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.